everyone. Welcome to Talks with Gallagher. I know it's been a while since we've been on, but thank you so much for joining us today. I have with me a good friend, Scott. I've known him for about, I think, 6 or 7 years now when I was living in Florida for a brief time teaching. And we've just stayed in contact here and there ever since. And I really
Yeah.
respect Scott's work in the filmmaking sphere and as a creative and as a business owner. And now you've been going more into podcast world and politics and a lot of P's now.
Yeah.
So going from C's to P's. um, and so that's also I've looked at and listened to some of your work with that, and so that's been really neat to see you emerging in that and seeing
Thank
that
you.
podcast kind of go to some high heights. So
Yeah.
that's been great. We may not be talking about politics tonight, though, but
Totally good.
we will be talking about more so. I feel like creativity, business, and faith.
Yeah.
And actually, next month for those watching, I will and listening, I will be starting on just focusing on leadership as well, and just focusing on that since for almost a year I've been doing talks with Gallagher, and just a variety of topics
Yeah.
with both business leaders, owners, and ministry leaders too. So, and Scott, you're both. So, um, so first, I don't know if I actually know this, but like, what originally got you into filmmaking?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a couple different things. So I always loved film. So I was raised with like the Spielberg stuff. My mom was a big Spielberg fan. So that's what originally got me in. So it was
Hmm.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was some of the early works, obviously Jurassic Park, all of those things. That got me into liking film. And then obviously Star Wars was like a big one for me. Like those were the classic things that like got me going.
Hmm.
And then from there, it was, I always remember it as like my dad got, I wish I had it still. It was one of the first digital cameras. I always took the other cameras, but they were so difficult at the time when it was still VHS or a little disc or anything like that.
Hmm.
My dad got the first digital camera, which had a floppy disk slot.
Wow.
And yeah, it had a floppy disk slot. I'm like making myself sound older than I am. It was just, we progressed really fast, I promise. But
Wow.
I got a floppy disk slot, and it made the video easier, and it could only record for like 5 seconds. So I had that, and that's what I started shooting like toys on with video and turning that into stuff, and that started it. And
Wow.
then I kind of played around with it, but I was never very. It was just always difficult, and those people who are in their 30s or older, or even in their late 20s, they'll understand that like filmmaking back then was like trying to find a program that could work, because Movie Maker on your PC was terrible. And if you were lucky enough to have a Mac that had iMovie, that was kind of your best bet. And then when I got into high school is where I actually had a camera that could shoot video. And I remember I'd always kind of known the basics of editing, but I didn't really understand it. One week I got really sick, and I was like, "Look, I'm gonna spend this time while I'm home learning how to use iMovie," because I had a Mac at the time.
Hmm.
And I spent every minute I had while I was recovering from being sick learning it. And that's once I had that figured out, I was set. And then
Wow.
became the guy through high school with the camera, and I was always filming. And then that regressed into commercials and short films, and then naturally into other projects and music videos, and then kind of turning into a business from there.
Wow. Wow. So it's like you've like lived with it pretty much all your life.
Yeah, I'd like to say.
Wow, that's really remarkable. Wow. Uh, wow. And so now all these years now into it under your belt. I mean, what is your creative process look like now?
Yeah.
As a much more professional, seasoned individual in your craft.
Okay, so what I always joke, like the creative process is such a weird term for me, because it's like I don't think I have one, but there is one. There's always a process behind producing something.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the nature of it. It changes a little bit, but I think the biggest difference between old Scott and the one that exists now is there's less copying of people. Like there's less of like, I'm going to look and see, oh, I want to, how do I do what they did? And it's more of like, I'm inspired by this, or like these ideas inspire me. How can I do those things? How can I do those ideas? And that kind of is the start of something. So I do a lot of music videos, and that's kind of my big thing. And that'll be, listening to a song, hearing from the artist, and then going, for me, it always starts with like, okay, what's one thing that's really cool that can be done that's going to be like something different? Like, what's that one cool thing that we could do? So that kind of starts the process. And then from there, it rolls out into, trying to hit the points that we want for the story and stuff. So like right now I have a contract with church. I'm doing a big project for their Easter series. And we've been going through a lot of cool things. And that whole project started with like, what's something cool we could do? Well, they had really long screens on their stage, and we were like, man, what would be really cool if we shot this whole thing anamorphic? Like, something we've never done. It's something different. Let's try it. And that sparked this project, and then kind of from there rolled out. So the creative process for me always starts with like, I'm very analytical. So it starts with like, how can I solve a problem? How can I do something that I've never tried before, or something unique? And then roll that out into like, okay, now how do we execute this project? And that's kind of like the way I am. I like to shoot for the moon. I really do. I know a lot of the times you have to roll back, and I've had the privilege now of like having some interns and people I get to work with and teach. And that's one of the things I always tell them is like, look, let's shoot for the moon. If we miss, we can have a backup plan, but let's not aim for the bottom and then just, achieve that. Let's try something hard.
I like that approach. Yeah. Yeah. Go for it hard and see if it's still possible.
I feel like it gets the best results. It kind of gets some cool stuff. And I like to be challenged. I really do.
Yeah. That's great. Wow. And I noticed we were talking right before the air here, going on air, about Big Wes's music video on The Promise. And, I noticed you guys shot it outside, which can sometimes create more dynamics. I'm just curious, how did that all that go down, creatively speaking, initially? And I saw Lance was also part of the DP with that too.
Yeah, so that was an interesting project. So Wes had contacted me, and we're close friends, and he had contacted me. I've done a lot of his videos, and he reached out, and he was like, hey man, I got this song and I really like it. And I was like, okay, well, go ahead and send me the song. Let me hear it, and then let's go from there. Let me hear the song, and then we can kind of work off of that. So he sent me the song, and I was like, dude, I like this. And he gave me kind of a storyboard of like, he likes these types of things. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So we originally were always going to do it outside. We were always going to do it in the morning. We had this field that we'd looked at. He had found a field that was actually like out in the middle of nowhere, and we thought it was cool. But like digging through, I was like, oh, that's private property, and I'm not about to get run off private property. So I found another field that was public, but the issue was we'd have very specific times. So we got there early in the morning, but the clouds just rolled in and they just never left. And Wes was a little down about it, but like part of the thing when you're a director on set, you're like, you have to make sure that like the morale stays up. And that was one of the things, but I actually liked it because how it is when the sun gets going, like it can be a nightmare to deal with that, especially when we were doing so many shots that were one takes, like trying to match all those one takes with sun constantly changing would have been bad. So we had overcast, and it worked out perfect for being able to just keep it flat for us. And then really what went into that dynamic of being outside was we wanted to map out our location. So you can't see it, but like when we got there, we set up our gear and everything. And then me and Lance, so Lance Asper was our DP. And then we had one of our first ACs was Carson. Like, so I walked out there. We all the three of us just kind of walked the path that we were going to take. So what you can't see in the video is that as we're shooting all this on this gimbal, there's like huge, just like massive holes in the ground that we're having to like walk around. Yeah. So like, dang. You'll be walking and all of a sudden you'll just drop a foot, and like that doesn't do very good. So we were having to map out our locations around that. And there were sections where there was just so much shrubbery that we couldn't walk through it. So we were having to map out like sections of where we wanted to go and stuff. Wow. But then we had behind us, you could see at the very edge, you don't see it in any of the frames, but on the very edge of some of the shots, there would have been a house that was just randomly there, like an apartment complex that was nearby. So we couldn't turn too much to our one side. So it presented a few challenges, but like
Oh,
we were blessed enough that we didn't have to deal with the sun on top of that. And Wes was super happy at the end when he saw it. He was like, dude, this looks awesome. And it fit the vibe, like our color schemes. Those are the details I think that filmmakers often forget, which is like, you can come with the best equipment and the best stuff and have all your visuals planned out, but like putting thought into like, what are my people gonna what are my actors gonna wear? What's my talent wearing? How are they dressing? Like, what's our vibe of the location? Those things can all really affect your shot.
yeah.
And for us, because the whole thing was dealing with different, like we really wanted to put an emphasis on like these beige and whites and like off whites kind of color scheme. That played into where we picked. So part of what I picked was I wanted to find a spot that wasn't a ton of green grass. So I found an area that was less green grass, more just kind of an open area. So all of that stuff kind of played into it. Our biggest challenge that day was the temperature, because we got there and I think it was like 40 degrees. So like everyone was cold and like trying to warm up. We had some hot chocolate they had brought and like people were warming up with coffee and stuff, but it was really cold. And it's weird for Florida. So like, like a 40 degree, 30 degree morning and then staying like that for most of the day is just not normal for us.
Yeah.
So it was a cold one for sure. If you ever watch if you see the behind the scenes, I'm wearing like the same gear I wore when I was in Iceland filming, like fully covered up, like just trying to stay warm and run everything.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing some more behind the scenes, just perspective in regards to all of that. I'm always fascinated by it. I haven't seen that behind the scenes video yet, but now that you mention it, I want to see it. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that being said, as far as just what we talked about with music and film, I'm curious. I know you're a big also theology buff. How does theology influence your creativity or the way in which you approach the film?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it influences in a couple ways. So like one of the things I used to be a youth pastor. So one of the things I always said was there was this nature of like, theology is a scary term. We don't like the word theology. But anytime you talk about God, that's a theological statement. So theology is just nature of like your conversations. You're going to have some understanding or some basis of it. Yeah. That all being said, the way it really influences kind of how we do projects and how I approach things depends on the project. So for videos like this, like I do a lot of church videos and a lot of churches will have me come in and shoot. And a lot of those things I'll start with, okay, what's the message here that we're trying to relay? Like we want to relay the gospel. Okay, how can we demonstrate or visually share the gospel without it being just straight, here's what it is and word for word kind of interpretation. We want to share that. So that'll be a starting point there. The way it influences in film, in kind of music videos and like projects like this, the theology works in with like, whether I'm dealing with a Christian artist or a secular artist, every single thing they're doing has a message behind it. And I try to identify that message. And then for me, it's identifying there's a theological thread there. So in Wes's, it's this idea. For me, it's the idea of God never failing on his promises. Like he keeps his covenants and he never backs down on that. And part of what that did shaping that video was like, I wanted continuous takes. I wanted not a lot of cuts. One, because I felt like that kind of hit the vibe we were going for in the song, but also because I felt like that in itself symbolized like this never changing, always keeping his promises God that's not cutting and becoming something different every time. And then in other videos, it's really just sometimes a case of like on set, the theology that influences you is like, hey, you got to remember just not be a jerk on set. Like you're going to have to walk right. Like people are looking at you, whether they know you're a Christian or not, just being a decent person on set is a big deal. Yeah. And that's part of how that'll influence just like set behavior and how you work with people. Because like, I've been on a lot of sets with like really talented directors, really talented DPs. And, there's nothing worse than working with someone you really enjoy their product, but then meeting them, working with them, and being like, wow, they're just not great people. They're terrible.
Mm.
So you hate doing that. So all that to say, like, theology influences in different avenues. Obviously, it'll
Sure.
influence lifestyle. It'll influence how you're acting. But for me, it'll also influence a little bit of the filming process and like how we go about shaping a film, because I'll use what I know to kind of help draw out more. Like, we did a kid series a while back, and a lot of like the process for that kid series was like they would come with an idea of like, hey, we want to teach the kids this. And they were great because they gave us a ton of freedom of like, okay, we don't know how we want to teach the kids. Like, I think one of them was fruit of the spirit.
Mm.
How do we teach them the fruit of the spirit, but also make it fun and interesting? So that became this way of like, okay, we start with the basics. What is it? What are we teaching? What's the theology behind that? And then kind of streaming those ideas out into a full series.
Mm.
It took time and it was a lot of work, but it's good
Wow.
to have that background because you can kind of bring different thought processes in. It's always good. At least I like working with clients who are always open to like, hey, give us some ideas, And I think
Yes.
that's always good because I'd rather have a few different ideas being tossed around and then we land on one than just going with one idea and that's it. Because you never really know what's the best option you could have had.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, you're right. It can be a little more complicated, even though it seems like it's more simple to have one idea, but it
Yeah.
sometimes overcomplicates it.
Yeah.
In the long run, because then it's like the client may not like know what they really want because they thought they knew what they want. So yeah, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think every creative is familiar with that kind of process right there.
Yeah.
Anyone that's a creative that heard that probably felt that statement very much so.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and also, I'm as far as like obviously COVID hit last year, but how do you see like the future of video? Obviously, like live streaming has definitely boomed, and
Yeah.
live conferencing and all of this. What like do you like? Do you have any sense or
Sure.
intuition as far as like what the future might look like for video?
Yeah, I think the future of video is looking better now than it has. And I know people are like,
Yeah.
like, there's COVID's hit and everybody lost work. Like, I had buddies who were up in Atlanta who were like, man, everything just stopped. And I get that. I was blessed where I had contracts that kept going. So I was able to make through. We also do weddings and like that was gone. But what I realized going through that was like it shifted to, like I said, live streaming. We saw a lot of live streaming stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
trying to find an ATAM or any of the Black Magic products during COVID was just insane. Like, I happened to snag one, and like a buddy of mine was like, "Dude, we're waiting for like 3 months still," and I was like, "Oh, I don't even know. I just found it on Amazon," and like
Wow.
a lot of people were trying to get live streaming equipment. We were trying to run live streaming, and I think that's going to be a big future with like how streaming is done. I really do think with the way gaming has come into it, the way we enjoy watching people have conversations and do life. We just enjoy that real life, that like real connection. So I think live streaming is not going anywhere. Even after the pandemic, all of this stuff's over, it's still going to be a big piece of how we consume media. So a lot of my videographers that I'm talking to, I'm like, hey, consider just grabbing some live streaming stuff, or at least learning how to do live streaming. It doesn't hurt, and it's easier now than it's ever been, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something worth considering. And then from there, I think what's been interesting is how many companies have realized, hey, we're going to not do in-person business anymore. We're just going to we're going to just do all of our stuff. You work from home. And then there's been a shift, at least in our market, where because of that, because these companies are no longer paying for big office spaces, they're shifting a lot of that money into advertising dollars. And with the rise of IGTV, with the rise of video-based marketing, especially with the rise of TikTok, these agencies are putting those dollars behind how can we make good video. And I think a lot of them are seeing like, it's not really worth us having 5 videographers on staff and a whole creative company. So maybe we do freelance this stuff. Maybe we go to marketing agencies and those types of things. But I think video, it's definitely a bumpy ride depending on the market you're in. Like there was no doubt that during all the lockdowns and stuff, it was tough on videographers and really any event industry or any type of thing like that, because you just weren't able to do your projects. But with that being said, I think as we go forward, I think we're definitely going towards something new, and I think it's going to be really good because I think there is going to be a boom in like the demand for video content. I think us being home put more demand on the system,
Yeah.
watching stuff. Like, listen, I would love to get some new ads because my YouTube ads were getting to the point where I was like repeating them word for word when they were playing. And I think like we're going to see more of that going. So what I'm encouraging people and like what I'm doing with my spare time is like, hey, any spare time I have, I'm putting into not so much finding new gear and all of that stuff, but how can I do new skills? So like I'm shifting away from, always learning how, like I know how to light a person. I know how to light, a set, but lighting for products is different. So I'm spending more time lighting for products and learning that stuff because I think that part of the industry is going to grow a lot too. Because product videography is easy. Like even if the pandemic never ended, I mean, we all hope that's not ever the case.
Yeah.
But like product videography would be fine because company can send you the product, you set up your set and you film it, and then you're good. That stuff's not going anywhere, and that stuff's easy to do. And that's one of the things that like I tell people, like, hey, if you can do that and you got an Instagram following, like for sure, let's go start doing that. Set up in your garage, grab some backdrops, set some lights up, and film your Cheerios or something, and then like get that started. And start learning how to go from there. And if you look at YouTube, you're also seeing that kind of shift because you're seeing a lot more YouTubers pop up who are teaching how to do product videography and how to do product commercials and shoots like that. Because I really do think that's kind of a part of the market that's starting to see a shift into and more of. And look, I love doing music videos. I don't know that those are, I think the way music videos are shifting and, how they change, I think those are never going to go anywhere. But I really do think that like having that background with like product stuff and things like that and like live streaming, those are things that are going to be different and cool and stuff. And then learning the effects stuff, man. Effects are becoming a big part of it, and it's becoming so much easier now with things like what I'm telling other videographers is like, hey, spend some time learning Unreal Engine, the Unreal system. Like that is wild what you can do in that. What used to take an entire studio to develop a game, now a videographer can learn and do an animated film with is something that I think was worth having those tools in your belt. So I think coming out of COVID, I think you're going to see videographers who spent that time learning skills and picking up talents and stuff, and other videographers who just panicked the whole time. Like the ones who were able to pick up those skills, those are the ones that are going to come out with more tools on their belt and be able to survive better in this new type of industry that's going to come out.
Yeah, definitely pivoting towards greater growth as a creative. Yeah, that's great. And I know you stay sharp, no doubt about that, Scott. But how do you stay sharp? Like, what do you do to keep yourself sharp creatively?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I do. One, I try to constantly film stuff. So like, there's going to be droughts. So this is what I tell people when they're like, "How do I stay sharp?" Like, first off, accept that there's going to be moments in your creative life and moments in your life where you are burnt out, down, just not feeling it. Those are fine. And if you get hung up on like, hey, I'm the only creative experiencing this, you'll burn out even faster because you'll just feel the weight of, hey, I'm not good enough for this. And that's not a weight you're supposed to bear. Like if you can refocus and go, hey, it's okay, I feel this way, I'm going to tell some of my friends I feel this way, get creative friends who you can talk to and just be like, hey, I'm just down, I'm not killing it right now, I don't like my work. That's okay. You don't have to love it at this moment, but remembering that you're going to go through that and that's okay, like being able to work through that. So that's the first thing I'll say. But how do you actually stay sharp? And here's how I do it. I stay inspired, and I like to try to stay inspired by, for me, it's reading. For me, it is getting as much information and consuming information as much as possible, whether that be theological, whether that be political, whether that be creatively. I just like consuming and reading books. And then also I watch a lot of content. I like to learn, like the educational side of it for me is what keeps me sharp and keeps me kind of always ready to engage in conversation or engage in production. So I'm constantly, watching a video on how to do this, learning how to operate a camera that I might not have, just so I have these experiences and how I can use those as tools on my tool belt. That's kind of how I'll go about it. And the other side of it is just make stuff for yourself. Like really get to the point where you're setting aside time to just make something for yourself, because it can be so easy to be client driven because you need work. We all need money to survive. So getting focused on like, hey, I'm going to set aside 20 minutes this week, 30 minutes this week, an hour this week. And I'm just going to, if you like to write, I'm going to write something. If you like to edit something, maybe I'm going to download some footage and try to edit something, try different something, try to learn, try to do something that for yourself. That's the hardest one for me, because when there's like 5 projects on the table and I'm doing all these things, I'm just not interested in trying to get, trying to get something like, and okay, I don't have time for my projects. Like,
yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
right now I know I'm looking at my project drive and I'm like, I have 2 or 3 personal projects that are sitting on there that are like, keep getting pushed to the back burner. But I'm trying now to make sure I put time into, okay, I want to edit this one. I want to get this far on it and try to do this. Because I really would like to get those out there and get people to like be able to share my personal work versus constantly doing a client's job or something like that. So those are all different methods I'll take to try to stay sharp. But it's going to look different for everybody. Like, not everyone's going to want to read a book. Like, I know that doesn't excite people. Like, there's a bunch of books behind me, and which is funny because I like most of my books I read on my phone, but some people just aren't like that. Like, I know a lot of my friends, they're like, yeah, I don't have time to read, and I'm like, no, I get that. Like, I totally understand that. So for everybody, it's a little bit different, but for me, it's trying to stay inspired. I like to read. I like to just absorb information, always trying to learn. And then really just making time for yourself and producing a product for yourself.
That's some really, really great advice, Scott. And yeah, it sounds like having that discipline to do personal projects, even though you might feel like you have stretched yourself creatively with your client projects, as you said. I'm curious, what is a personal project? Can you share that you're been working on behind the scenes?
So there's 2. One right now is a product shot where I've just been doing some product work. Like, I've picked a product I liked, started filming it, and just kind of like got some pieces of it together to kind of form like a mini ad, just because it's something I wanted to demo. It's a different challenge for lighting. And then the other project is a short film I had written during the start of the pandemic. We shot, and then the pandemic hit, and it was just a ton of different, for me, it never really slowed down too badly. So I was kind of busy, kind of like having to push back. So coming back to that project has been great. I'm starting to get through it now and try to get some of the editing done. And that's been a big part of one of my personal projects. And then we're gearing up right now for another personal project we're going to shoot later this year, that we're excited about, which is just going to be, the plan is like just going to celebrate this like football team that we've been following, this local high school, and we're kind of doing like a promo video / documentary for them. So that's been it's been a cool project that we've been laying out. We've kind of got most of the pieces in place, so we're finalizing some details and getting our cameras selected and all that for it. And those are the main projects right now. There's a few other things that are just like side things where I'm like, hey, I shot this footage, I want to see what I can do with it. If you look at my Instagram, I used to do quite a bit when I like traveled more. I used to do more travel videos and stuff where I could like, share something with some type of poetry with it or something, just because that's what I liked making, and I'd like to get back to those. Unfortunately, I'm not traveling right now, so but hopefully once I start traveling again and get back out, I'll be able to get some good stuff and kind of get back to doing those projects too.
That's great. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, staying fit creatively. Great.
It really is. It's just like working out, with the same amount of pain and frustration.
yeah, different kind, but
yeah.
Right. Wow. And so, just to change of gears a little bit, I'm super curious. What got you involved with wanting to start a podcast on politics?
Yeah. So. Oh man, that's a great one. So like I said, I've been a creative. I've been doing commercials and stuff and all these projects for 10 plus years now. Yeah. Me and my wife have had the privilege to start a business and run, doing weddings and commercial work for 10 plus years. And then I've had contracts with churches and stuff. And I've been good. I've enjoyed that. But I've always enjoyed government and politics because it's just always something I was fascinated by. My bachelor's actually wasn't in film. I did film for my associates for a few months, and then it was like I had a film teacher who was just like, hey, you should just not do any more of this. And I was like, well, why not? And he was like, you got what you need, go. And I was like, okay. So I switched and did the college thing where I like hopped around majors for a few times and landed in political science. And I just really, I
Mm,
liked the concept. I liked how government worked. I liked all the imperfections of it and stuff. And I liked having the conversations about it. Um, but I also hated how it became so polarizing at this, like, at a point where it became like you couldn't have a conversation about it.
mm,
And then I was working at a church doing video stuff with them for a while, and I noticed that a lot of the people there just didn't know government. They just didn't understand stuff, and they would often
mm,
ask me like, "Hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with this?" And then when the pandemic hit, I was getting inundated even more with like questions of like, there was so much uncertainty at the start of the pandemic. There were so many rumors, so many things flying around that it became, and there was so much polarization from both sides that it became so hard to even have a conversation.
mm.
And our neighbor, who was good friends of ours, she was a mental health counselor.
Oh,
And
wow.
we were having a conversation about how it was really late at night. We were just having a conversation because during the pandemic, during that like pandemic, those were the only people we really saw. So we were talking and we were like, it's fascinating how interconnected our mental health is with our political philosophy, our religious views. Like, it's amazing how all that is interconnected. And we were like, man, that's something that's what I want to talk about. I've always wanted a podcast. Like, I've always thought about it. I just didn't want to do a creative one. I wasn't sure what else I would do. I wanted to do a politics one, but I didn't. The last thing the world needed was another like another person giving their political
Yeah,
opinion.
right,
I
right,
was like, we
right.
don't need more of that. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
came up with something called American State of Mind. And the idea behind the podcast was that we were going to come in and analyze events as middle of the road as we could and kind of look at what mental health issues affect those policies and how policies affect the mental health.
Mm,
And it started out as just, we were going to try it out and see how it went. It took off. We really had a great following, and we've been growing ever since. And we've gotten into a lot of different topics. We talk a lot about the election and followed all of that stuff. And then, we've gotten to talk about, and interview people about, race issues. We've talked about religion. We've talked about suicides and depression, media coverage. We've been able to dive into it, but all of it's geared towards education. Like, what I tell people is like, look, if you're listening to the podcast and you're trying to get me to give you who to vote for and what to believe, you're not. I say it all the time on the show. I'm like, listen, there's legitimate points to both sides, and depending on where you are in your life, you're going to pick and choose a political lane because it benefits you, and that's okay. Just because it doesn't benefit your neighbor doesn't mean that you're wicked or evil or your neighbor's evil. It just means you guys are at different points and need different things. And that's kind of the point of government, is that it's supposed to be representative to try to do the most good, and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. We can all have those differing opinions and beliefs. And that's kind of what we do on the show, is we'll talk about like, hey, this is what happened, but here's kind of the behind the scenes of it. Here's the different sides of it. And
mm,
then we'll talk about, we'll kind of educate. And that's our big thing. And that actually stemmed into the creation of what we're working on now, which is a nonprofit that's geared towards, and it's been able to combine my creativity because it's geared
mm,
towards releasing videos that help teach adults and kids just about government. Because I mean, most of us, our understanding of government is there's a president, there's a Congress, and there's a Supreme Court, and then that's whatever we got from civics or whatever government classes we took in high school and maybe in college, and that's it. And rightfully so. Like, I don't expect every single American to sit and read the United States Constitution every morning. Like, that's just insane. I don't expect it.
yeah.
But I think what we need is more of that type of engagement and less political
Mm,
commentary. So like, that's what we're trying to
mm,
do, is teach people,
mm,
hey, here's the information you need to be able to make the decisions about what you want to believe and what you choose to stand for. Like, be informed. That's really it. Like, and this is what we're gearing towards, is trying to be informed in a way that's not tied to media dollars, not tied to advertisers, not tied to trying to like target a specific group, but really just tied to people who are like, hey, I want to understand what that means when they talk about it. Like, I want to be able to know where I stand on it, because I just don't have an opinion of it. And we realized there was a lot of people like that. So the podcast took off, and that's kind of been what we've been doing. And it's been great because it's something different. But there's also still video elements in it. We've been able to do some video podcasts. We've been able to do some for some of our sponsor like sections. So like those who've become monthly supporters, we get to do videos with them. So there's been some really cool opportunities there to merge the two fields.
mm,
And I think having that, like, again, tool set that was so diverse really helped me be able to do that.
yeah.
If I didn't have this, what made the podcast easier was really the fact that, like, I knew how editing software works. I knew how to do stuff. Like knowing those things made it that much easier to launch something. And that just kind of
Sure.
reinforces the idea like, hey, there's nothing wrong with being a jack of all trades. You know, definitely mastering a trade is great, but having a lot of skills and a lot of like knowledge is really useful if you try to shift lanes or do multiple things.
Well, that's encouraging because I can relate to that as well.
Yeah, I have never met a creative that's like, hey, I'm a master at this and not anything else. I meet a lot of creatives who are like, I'm kind of a jack of all trades. Yeah, I can do a little podcast audio. I can do a little this. I can do a little that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I think, is because like we're just trying to have jobs. And, like you kind of like if a client comes to you and is like, hey, I need a video for this. Oh, by the way, do you do websites? Like, I don't know many creatives that are like, no, I don't. I know a lot of creatives who are like, yeah, and then spend the next week learning Squarespace and WordPress because you're like, I got to figure this out. Hold on, how do I do this? I mean, that got me a few times. That's how I got into. I got into a lot of things. Like half the reason I know website is because I said yes to a client that I probably should have never said yes to, and then spent sleepless nights learning everything I needed to learn so that I could actually deliver on that client. Wow. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I can't. There was definitely a time. This is a great story for it. Is where a client wanted to have something animated, and I said yes. I was like, yeah, we can do that, and then spent like a month learning how to do it. And that's the only reason I really know a ton, like a good amount of After Effects was learned because of that. Because I was like, I don't actually know how to do this. So I learned how to animate and how to do all of that stuff. Not any good at animating, but I learned enough to be able to get by and complete, and the client was happy. But that's kind of the thing that I think a lot of creatives go through is like, you know, hey, we say yes to something. And there's probably a lot of bad to that, but there's also a lot of good because like the skills I picked up from that were really awesome. Like being able to learn on the fly and make those adjustments have helped me a lot in every field I'm in.
Right, because sometimes it's not always about what all you know, but how quick you can learn something new as well and apply it too.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have knowledge, and I agree with you on that too. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, learning on the fly and all that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, that goes back to like I used to be a high school coach for a lacrosse team.
Oh, that's
and
right. Yeah.
And I was one of the things I learned or I looked for specifically in my players at the tryouts was I didn't look for the most talented players. Those were great. I definitely would love to have them, but I always would give every single player a correction, and then I would look to see which players were able to make a correction or couldn't make the correction. And really, what I'm looking for is a player that can learn. If there's a player that can listen and can learn, I can go a long way with them. And that same thing goes when I'm looking for like people will message me and be like, hey, I want to follow you. Okay, well, here's what I'm going to ask. You know, I'm not crazy. I'm not going to ask you to do a ton of things, but I'm going to give you a little bit of feedback and see how you do on set from there. And then that will kind of affect how I think, you know, hey, how are you doing? How are we going to go from there? It's really all about that learning. If you can make an adjustment and learn on the fly and do little things, man, you're going to go a lot farther and you'll be more useful on set. I'll tell you right now.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, as we come to a close, and I know we have some time frame here, is there anything else you want to share about creative world, filmmaking, politics, business, faith?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, I think we are entering a really fascinating time where like faith, politics, and video are really merging into this like weird world that we're in. I mean, no other time in society or humanity have we ever had the ability to reach as many people as we can reach with one single video. I mean, somebody dancing to a song can get 35 million views in 2 days, you know,
TikTok or something.
Yeah, like something like that. It's just insane to me that like that kind of reach exists. So a couple of things that I think that have just been floating around with me is like one, always kind of just be ready to embrace the next thing. Don't ever be the example I'll use when I'm talking to people is like, you don't want to be Blockbuster, you know, like you want to be able to adapt to something that's coming. And the example I use is I'll never forget. There was a show on TV called Attack of the Show when I was growing up. And if anybody listening would ever watch G4 TV, you would know that show very well. And then one of their hosts was talking about, this was back when Blu-rays and HD DVD were becoming a battle. They were trying to see who was going to win. and they interviewed the host of the show. His name Kevin Pereira, and he was like, they were like, yeah, who do you think is going to win? Is it going to be Blu-ray or is it going to be HD DVD? And he was like, it's going to be neither. And I remember he going, yeah, it's like, it doesn't matter. Neither of those are going to win, because at the end of the day, you're just going to start streaming stuff. Internet's going to get better. And at this point, I was watching it going, that's insane, because right now it takes me like 20 minutes to get on the internet. Like I had DSL at the time. I'd just gotten rid of dial-up. And I was like, there's no way this will work. Like, I can't use this. So I remember hearing that, and then fast forward, and now look at us. Like, I think I got rid of all my Blu-rays finally, and everything is streamed. Everything is either digitally downloaded or streamed in some way. Yeah. And the example I use is like, don't be the Blockbuster that didn't see what was coming, didn't see what was down the line. Right. You got to be able to be ready to adapt. And if you get too hung up and stuck on like, well, this is how I've always done video, or I've always done production this way, or I've always, had it this way. Well, you're going to have to learn that like things change. And unfortunately, if you can't change with it, you get pushed out. And I think it's very important to be flexible in that. Like, I know a lot of really talented DPs who just didn't want to adapt to, smaller crews and things like that. They always wanted a big set, and unfortunately, you're not always going to get that. Sometimes you're just going to have, 5 guys and a camera, and that's what you got to deal with. And sometimes you'll have big sets. Like I've just kind of always tried to be the flexible thing in that. Mm-hmm. And then on a leadership side of it, one of the things that's been sitting with me is, I have been working with this pastor, and he's a big name pastor. And it was something that really stuck out with me about him, is that no matter what room he walks in, he is never bigger than that room. And I really like that about it from a leadership standpoint, because I think that's important. So if you're a creative and you have, a massive following on Instagram or TikTok, or you've done big productions, big movies, whatever you've done, or maybe you're just political and you've become a congressman, senator, something big, wherever you are, I think it's important for us to remember to never be bigger than the rooms we're in, because if you walk into those rooms and you become like, hey, I'm the biggest person here, or look how many things I've done, look at all these things, you lose your ability to influence. You miss opportunities. Like, I think it's always great that in the stories within the Bible, when we see Jesus, anytime that he's in these massive crowds, he still singles out individuals. He never gets lost in this massive crowd of like, all these people are here. And it's always this individual he goes back to. And I think that's a big significant point that we miss, is like, there's a God who creates this universe, who is big enough to create an infinite expanding universe, but also small enough to know every detail about you and have that intimate relationship. Well, we should be having that same process as we engage with those around us and the way we work with each other on sets. Listen, I'll come on set sometime and I don't know every single person in there, but I'm going to engage with every single person in there because they're there, they're putting up their time, whatever it is. Never be bigger than that room. So never get focused on the 800 other things you got to do. Remember who's in that room, remember who you can talk to and who you can engage with. Because I think those are really relevant and important pieces of it. Like, I think that's a significant part of just leadership, humanity, and Christianity, your faith.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many wisdom nuggets with what Scott just shared, and set etiquette, set culture, and all that is super important. I feel like that's also translated even like how you eat together, like with a family, and how that's translated even in your private space as well, gets translated in your public space. Wow, that's so good. And the leadership aspect too, that you mentioned. Thank you for sharing that. That's so good. And we have these leadership, examples and models. Even though they may not always be perfect, we can learn the best from it and grow as leaders ourselves too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's awesome. So, Scott, where can people find like your work and your podcast and your just stuff that you bring, what we just shared tonight?
Yeah, so you guys can check out my personal Instagram. It's I'm the beard guy _ on Instagram. It's real simple. Beard's usually longer, but it's getting hot in Florida right now, so it got cut back a little bit. But I'm the beard guy on Instagram. So the beard guy _ on Instagram. And then if you're interested in learning more about American State of Mind, it's at American State of Mind on Instagram. You can also check us out on asmpodcast.com. And then we're available wherever you get your podcasts on all the platforms and stuff. You can learn more about that. And then, those are all great platforms to follow and check out. And you guys can kind of keep up with what I'm doing. I tend to be active. I go through spurts on Instagram. I think we all do, where I'm like super active and then I'll disappear for a few days. But yeah, definitely check it out. I'd love to have the follow. And I'm always willing to answer questions for creatives and politics and stuff. So shoot a message away.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Scott. And appreciate your time with us tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening with Talks with Gallagher. Stay tuned for next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Bye, guys.